So I bring greetings and blessings from the church at Eastpoint in East Belfast this morning. Again, they're celebrating Mother's Day. And it is a joy and honour always on days like this to honour the ladies and girls in any church, in any house of God, for everything that you do. Whether you're a mum, a sister, an aunt, a daughter, a granny, we honour you because you impact lives like you never know. And churches would not be where they are without you. And so this morning, I actually want to look at a woman, which is very unusual because last year when I went to the Leeds weekend, I actually spoke in 3 men. But you know what? We've all got something to teach each other, haven't we? We've all got something to learn from each other. And the passage is found in the Old Testament. Hannah and the team, can I just say, the worship songs could not have been better. God's hand was over that, about the goodness of God, about surrender and serving God, and about blessing his name no matter the circumstances. Because I'll be honest, on the way up this morning, I thought, Lord, I'm not really sure I've done the right thing this morning. But just from the outset, when we started to sing, I thought every one of those songs just sits perfectly within this message this morning. And we're in the Old Testament, and I have to say the Old Testament is actually my favourite part of the Bible. And I'm sure most of you may be familiar with it. If you're not, but it's actually the first 39 books of the Bible. And it became a favourite of mine when we were at Bible college. When we were at Bible college, life was hard, okay? They didn't exactly always make it easy for us in that we had to do chores, and it was called work period. But I kind of got off a bit lightly because I'm going to give my age away here. I'm actually a trained typist, as in hitting the, that type of typewriter and carbon copies. And yep, I'm really not that old, but it makes me sound so old. So I got a job working for the Old Testament lecturer. We didn't get paid. It was literally free work. And I would have typed up all his notes. And obviously there I was able to glean a lot of information. Didn't manage to get my eyes on any exam papers. Was offered many bribes if I could get my hands on exam papers. But I never managed to get to see those. But I really fell in love with the Old Testament. And they may be old stories of ancient times, but they still have relevance today for us in the 21st century, sitting in Carrick Fergus. And in the Christian calendar, we are in the period of Lent, leading us to the most precious, crucial time in Christian history, the death on the cross and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. And it's important as we look at the Old Testament and we reflect on Old Testament stories that we do this with this in mind, because we're in such a privileged position. They were in a position that they were waiting for the Messiah. We know he's come, and we also know the end of the book, that he's coming again. And we are sitting in such a privileged position with hindsight that they didn't have. Because the stories and right through the Old Testament, it connects us to Jesus and into the New Testament. And it's hard to understand that if we don't understand the Old Testament. There's a thread that runs right through from Genesis to the end of the very last book in Revelation. And we see God's plan of redemption and restoration. And today I would just like to share some thoughts from the story of a family. They are found in the first book of Samuel, and we'll not read all of it for the sake of time, but we'll pick up on some of the verses and then maybe a few verses in chapter 2 to wrap up. And this story about this family starts straight from the book of Judges. Our Bible timeline is slightly different. We've Ruth in the middle, but it actually moves straight from the time of Judges, probably around the time where Samson's life was coming to an end. And Samson, as we know, was one of the judges. And Judges didn't really end well. It said it was a time that Israel had no king and everyone did was right in their own eyes. Does that sound familiar? A world where everyone was just doing what they wanted when they wanted. And then this leads into 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we pick up a story about a man called Elkanah, and it tells us that he had 2 wives. And all the men in the congregation are thinking, why would you do that to yourself? And the women are thinking, not on my watch. Absolutely not. Double trouble under one roof. Who even thought that would be a good idea? But in those days, in Old Testament times, polygamy, it was a thing. It was culturally acceptable for various reasons. It was acceptable because for socio-economic reasons, for the nation, for families to have large families, for the family business. It also gave parents security for the future because their children would look after them, hopefully. But because it happened doesn't mean it's what God approves. And we've got to remember they were living with other nations around them, and they were taking on practices. And polygamy isn't actually endorsed in the Bible. We see in Genesis that God ordains marriage as one man and one woman, and Jesus backs that up in the New Testament. And apparently, I heard recently that it's on the rise again. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like, but I'll leave that one to Pastor Jordan. But where it existed in the Bible, and we also see it, you may know the story of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. But where it existed, and in the lives of Isaac and Jacob and Rachel and Leah and Rebecca and all of that going on, there was conflict, there was confusion, and it just caused toxic environments. And this is exactly what we find in the life of this family. Hannah was what is thought as Elkanah's first wife, and then Peninnah was his second wife. And Hannah couldn't have children, and that is why it is thought then that he married Peninnah, and that's what could have and sometimes did happen in those days, very, very often. And having children also carried this cultural status around the economy and prosperity, and again, that security. And we pick up the story from verse 4, and they are on their way to Shiloh, which has become the worship centre for Israel. The tabernacle has been brought there, but it's a much sturdier frame, and this would be based on the tabernacle that God gave Moses the instructions in the book of Exodus for the people to worship in, and it was the place where God dwelt. It was their place where God dwelt in the Holy Holies by a cloud over the place. God's presence was there. And it says this, that they had gone up to offer their sacrifices, as they always did. And it actually says that whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah, he gave a double portion because he loved her. And it actually says, which is really interesting, and the Lord had closed her womb. And just park that thought. And because of this, it is described as Peninnah as her rival, mocked her, provoked her. And this went on year after year after year. And whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her until she wept. And she was physically ill that she could not eat. And her husband Elkanah would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? In verse 9 it says this, once they had finished eating and drinking, Hannah stood up. And to us, that just means that Hannah stood up. But in the Hebrew, it is actually a Hebrew metaphor or idiom, and it's the word kum, which actually means, in our English, Hannah put her foot down. Hannah stood up in a decisive action, and it was almost like I'm not doing this anymore. The voices were coming at her, the voice of Peninnah, the abuse, the mocking, the voice of her husband, Hannah, do I not mean more to you? And Hannah thought, I need to make a decision here. And it says, once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, then she went to the tabernacle, or some translations will have as the temple. Is interchangeable. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. As she kept on, she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servants, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used in his head. And Eli, observing her mouth, thought she was drunk and said to her, how long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. And she said in verse 16, not so, my Lord. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying out of my grief and anguish. And Eli answered her, go in peace. And may the Lord of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. And she said, may your servant find favour in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning, they arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back home to Ramah. And we're just going to leave it there for the minute. You see, Hannah was in a very toxic situation, living in an environment that was just pulling her down. And she had this deep, deep longing in her heart that she could do nothing about. And as we said, it said the Lord had closed her womb, because we know that in the background that God was doing something, but Hannah didn't know that. She was being bullied and mocked. She felt like a failure. She would have been a social embarrassment, and her long-term future was insecure. And today, on a morning like Mother's Day, and as has already been said by Claire and Sarah, that sometimes this can be a hard day, can't it, for some people? And I don't know what it looks like for you, and each of us in this room may see Mother's Day differently and have different experiences. Maybe it's a day that makes us smile, maybe it's a day that hurts or makes us think about the times that have been, should have been, or could have been. And I know that this morning in a gathering like this, there are those of you who are sitting with unfulfilled desires, unfulfilled and unmet needs, unanswered questions, and maybe you even feel unanswered prayers. It could be today that Hannah's story is your story, or it's the story of a loved one that you watch hurting and grieving, or maybe it's harsh words that have been spoken over you by someone that you thought loved you and would encourage you, or maybe it's that job or that promotion that you really wanted, but it didn't come through. Maybe it's a breakdown of a friendship, the betrayal in a marriage, or that you long to meet someone, be married. Maybe today it's the health diagnosis of you, or a family friend or loved one that has just flipped life upside down. The child who has gone off the rails. Or maybe the things that you have done in the past still weigh you down. Or the son and the daughter that you stood in the house of God with. Maybe even this house of God. And you dedicated them to God. And today, they've walked away. They're walking their own road. And you feel like that failure. And I can tell you this morning that was our story. We have 2 sons. Jordan's the eldest, and Reuben is 4.5 years younger. Brought up in the house of God, dedicated in the house of God to God, and at the age of 18 walked away. And I remember when he started to tell us some things, I felt the Spirit of God saying to me, be very careful how you answer here, because this will set the road for the future. And there's things that hit our lives that cut like a knife, isn't there? That we're not expecting. This afternoon I will go to see my mum with my brother and sister and Stephen. She's 86 years old. But when we walk in, we don't know whether she'll recognise us or not, because vascular dementia has her locked in another world. This will be the 3rd Mother's Day. We will visit her in a nursing home that is best placed to care for her needs. We never imagined this would be her story. She was full of life. She was even smaller than me. But you wouldn't have messed with her. She was full of life. She loved to go out for coffee and lunch, and I know that if we weren't where we are here, she would still have us driving her everywhere. And it's not looking like how we thought. And not that long ago, after a visit, my brother said to me, Donna, this is hard. Some days this is just hard. And it is. The disappointments of life cut through us. They are exhausting. And probably like Hannah, we look at our lives and we think, it's not supposed to be this way. Surely it should be better than this. And added to that, we have the voice of a culture that tells us we should have it all. Do what pleases you. We have Instagram reels of shiny, sparkly lives. And we think that's the way our life should be, and we feel that we're not measuring up when it doesn't. But the reality is, whether you're a person of faith or not this morning, we will face times when life is hard. And we will face times when we question why. And as Christians, those of us who are following God, our thought patterns can go off in all directions, and we think, this shouldn't be happening. I thought I was meant to be living a blessed life. Maybe we start to think, God, is it me? What have I done? Are you punishing me? But here's the bottom line. We live in a broken world. From the outset, in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve fell, the world got broken, and sometimes we do too. But from that point, the redemption plan began. And God said, on Mother's Day, I would just say that it was through a woman that this plan would come to fruition. And we will endure hardships, and it can really throw us off course. And sometimes we just want to try and fix it ourselves, someone else to fix it, or maybe we just want God to helicopter in and lift us out of it. And we can feel abandoned and insecure and hopeless. And Hannah's story shows us that sometimes it doesn't always get fixed in the moment. There are things that we have to walk through. But in the background, God was writing a story that Hannah could not see. And church, this morning, he is writing a story that you and I still cannot see over our lives. But in the moment, we have a choice of how we're going to respond. And that's really what I just want to draw out here this morning. We could try and fix it ourselves the way Abraham and Sarah did with Hagar and made a mess. Or we could just let the weight of it wear us down. Do we just want to give up? Peninnah turned it outwards, and she hid out her pain because she was in pain. She saw that Elkanah loved Hannah more than her, and there was another mess. Lives being hurt and broken. But she turned it on Hannah and mocked her and attacked her. And Elkanah, to an extent, he turned it on himself and kind of made it about him. But Hannah, we read that she stands up and she makes a decision. and she goes to the place of safety. You see, the tabernacle was a place of worship, but it was also a place of safety for the weary, for the traveller. And that is why in Psalm 61, David says, "For you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings." And before the Lord she comes. And the difference with Hannah is when she entered that tabernacle, she was only allowed to go into the courtyard of it, to the porch as such, because between her and the Holy of Holies, there was another area called the Holy Place that only the priests could enter. And this morning, because of the cross, we have full access to the heart of the Father and the presence of the Father. Nothing in between, because Jesus became our in-between. And he became the sacrifice that the priests would make for the people. He became our sacrifice, and he gives us full access. But she came as far as she could. And just 3 pieces this morning. She came to the presence of God, and she postured herself in a heart of surrender. And I can just see Hannah in that place on her knees, possibly prostrate before God. And she prayed like she had never prayed before, because hard times, don't they drive us further? They either drive us further into the heart of God, or we run. And Hannah was driven to the presence of God with a posture of surrender and a prayer of petition, where she literally, it said, she poured out her heart. And that means literally like a drink offering, that she was emptied out. And it says, in deep anguish, in bitter weeping, in misery, deeply troubled. Any doctor will tell you that holding pain is not good for us. It leads to emotional and physical illness. And Hannah just poured it all out. It was messy. So messy that Eli, the priest, watching her, thought she was drunk. This just wasn't a sob. This was ugly crying. It was messy. She was calling and petitioning God. She said to Eli, "I'm not drunk, I'm just pouring out my heart." You see, God wants us to come to him even in the mess, even in the things that are going wrong, even in the times that we feel, I don't even want to go to church. I don't want to be with Christians. Even in those tough times, God's saying, come. Because if we can't be messy here, if we can't be messy with him in our bedroom floor or anywhere else, where can we be? He is our tabernacle. He is our safe place. He is our refuge. And she brings her specific request before God. Notice she just didn't say, God, give me a child. She was specific. God, give me a son. And Philippians 4 tells us to bring our request before God. And the next part of this is really important, because it says when she is asking God, she asks God to remember her. And that word in the Hebrew is a word called sakar. And that word isn't like us saying, I'll remember to do that, or, oh, I remember her, and recalling things. It's an act of remembering. It's a never stop remembering, a passing it on, and it also comes with action. And basically, what Hannah is saying, God, remember me, do not forget me, and in your remembering, act on my behalf. And may I see the loving, merciful action of God over my life. Just like those songs we sang this morning. Lord, let me live in the goodness of God. Blessed be your name, regardless of where I'm at. And then she goes on to pray, and God, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. No razor will ever touch his head. She is not bargaining with God. And here's how we know this, and I know this has been maybe taught before, that she did this, God, you do this, God, you do that. But Tim Keller brings this out beautifully when he said the vow that she made means her son will be a Nazarite. And usually when a Nazarite vow was made, it could, a lot of the time, was only for a short period of time, but here she was offering her son for his life. And the other thing about the Nazarites, where they were attached to the priesthood, it would be Eli. And they were not wealthy. They were looked after through the funds and the food of the tabernacle. So the security that she would get for her future from a child, she wasn't going to get it. Because he was going to be dedicated to the Lord the rest of his life. And the other thing was that Hannah left that day, and this is really important. She didn't know what the answer was going to be. She didn't actually know if God was going to answer her, but what she did know was that he was a good God, that he was a merciful God, and he was a loving God, and he would work all things together for good. And Eli speaks over her, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked for. Something that day shifted in Hannah. She was no longer downcast. She went and she ate. And then they went and they offered their sacrifices, and they went home, and she went home to the same situation. But you see, at this stage, she went with a grace and a peace over her life to navigate that part of her life, to navigate that gap of surrender and not knowing what God was going to do. You see, we have a choice to make. We can run. We can turn it on others. We can turn it in on ourselves. Or we can turn it upwards. And we can come to God. We can come to the presence of God and say, Lord, this is hard, but I'm surrendering. And even Jesus, when we think of the cross in the Garden of Gethsemane, said to his Father, if there's any other way, let this cup pass. Not my will, but yours be done. And it's that heart of surrender that brought Hannah a peace, that she was able to trust her God, that he would do what was best for her. She traded her will for his will. She entered his presence with pain and left with peace. Her circumstances hadn't changed, but she came to a moment of her life. It was even if, blessed be your name, God. And you remember those 3 young Hebrew men thrown into a fiery furnace because they would not bow the knee to foreign gods. And they said, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, even if our God will do us right. And there was a 4th man in the fire. And I want to tell you today that no matter what you're going through, there is a 4th man in the fire. He is walking that broken road with you. And even if it looks different, Hannah said to God, I'm going to trust you with my life, and I'm walking into it with you. And then it goes on to tell us that the Lord remembered, and again it's that word Sakar. And he acted, and Hannah became pregnant, and she had her baby boy. And you see, when we come to the tabernacle, we are carrying stuff with us, aren't we? Sometimes it looks like this. Bags of rubbish, of the betrayal, of the loss, the broken dreams, the hopes, and what we thought it would look like. But sometimes it also looks like the precious things, because what Hannah did was she still took that child And by this stage, he would have been 3 years old. And I can just see her with his little bag, taking him to the house of God and leaving him there. And some of us have got things that we want to hold on to because we feel, God, I think I can do this better. I think I can look after this better. And some of us have had things spoken over our children that have caused us anxiety and worry. Can I tell you something this morning? When Jordan was born, there was a bit of a panic. The cord was around his neck twice and it hadn't been picked up, and we don't really know what happened. But we had a paediatrician who told me that due to maybe lack of nutrients and different things in his life, in the womb, that, he may have problems with his gross motor skills. So don't expect him to be a sportsman. Really don't expect much of him out of his life. And I remember as a young mum sitting in Perth in Scotland, and Stephen and I were in a coffee shop and holding this 3-month-old baby, looking at him thinking, God, surely there has to be more than this. Can I tell you something? He was Dromore Amateurs Youth leading goal scorer for 10 years. Things are spoken. But here's what we see with Hannah. When we go into the 2nd chapter and she starts to sing her praise song to God, she starts to sing about how God reversed everything. How the barren became fertile. How the poor are lifted up. He is the God of the reversal. And I say to you this morning, whatever has been spoken over your life or over the life of your child, you take that and you leave that to God, because sometimes what we want to do is we say, no, God, you see, this is mine. I'm going to make sure this one works out. But he's saying, just give it to me. Give it to me. And like Hannah, we will find that the peace of God that transcends all understanding, the peace of God that doesn't make sense, comes into our lives. And Hannah's going to come and sing a song now over us. And I know that sometimes the road is hard, but he is the God of the even if. And here's the thing. Joseph went through a pit and a prison before he became Prime Minister. You see, on the other side of our surrender, God has something. And here's the other thing, we may not see it this side of eternity. And there's a song by Corey Ashbury. It's called Homecoming. And it is the most beautiful picture of heaven and us getting to that side. And it talks about the embers being covered by crimson robes, the crimson robes of Jesus, and flowers pushing up from the ashes, because from one Eden to the new Eden, he is making all things new. He is reversing what the enemy tried to do on the earth and in our lives. And he is creating new things. And this song goes on to say, and heaven joins in with the glorious sound, and the great cloud of witnesses all gather round, as the ones who are lost are finally found. This is our homecoming. We do not know what is on the other side of our surrender. Don't give up. Keep bringing it to the cross. Keep surrendering to Jesus. Amen.
Never changes what you see.
And here's the challenge this morning. Will we trust him, even if? Trust is the truest connection we can have with God. And I just feel I need to say this morning. He has not forgotten you. He has not forgotten your prayer, your request. He has not forgotten you. And maybe you're here today and you feel, but I do think God has forgotten me. This has been years. This was years for Hannah. And we don't know what's on the other side of our surrender. But we do know this, that he is still the mountain mover. He is still the mountain mover. He is still the way maker. And he is your Red Sea road. He is your Red Sea road, and he will take you through. And I just want to close today by praying Eli's prayer over you. Don't get stuck in a moment, but keep moving through with God. You see, when Eli prayed this over Hannah, and he prayed shalom, peace over her. Peace isn't the shalom peace he was talking about, was just not peace without adversity or peace without bad things happening in your life, but it was also about a peace of wholeness, of soundness, of health, safety and prosperity permanently. And I just want to pray this morning, Father God, this morning as we declare that we have sung, you are good, and that you can be trusted. And God, I pray over your people this morning. Go in shalom peace. And may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked for. Amen. And this morning we're just going to come and sing as our final song. We'll come to the altar. The Father's heart is open-minded. If you doubt him this morning, just think of this. His unconditional love for you. The cross says it all. So this morning we're going to stand and we're going to sing this song. And just open your hearts and bring to the altar, bring to his presence what you need to leave there. And I hope and pray today that when you leave, that you go out in that peace that Hannah had, knowing that even if, no matter what, my God's grace and peace and mercy will help me navigate the gap. But one day, he's going to restore everything back to himself.